Now, on top of that, I see a lot of people talking about nation state adoption. And so that should get you excited. Even though the price is going sideways, nation states are doing all this stuff. My current expectation with about 95% confidence is that the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve will be Bitcoin only. It will happen. And I think that the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve will not only be holding the Bitcoin that we currently have in the United States, but also buying more Bitcoin. And so if you get those three things, Bitcoin only, you do get the reserve, and we're going to be buying more Bitcoin, I think that is going to bring an immense amount of interest from other countries around the world. Now let's go around the world and take a look at this. El Salvador buying Bitcoin. We know that Bhutan, they've been mining and they hold a bunch of Bitcoin. We also know that Russia, they've come out publicly and said that they're mining Bitcoin, that they're using it for bilateral transactions. We've recently seen a number of central banks start talking about, should we go and buy Bitcoin? We saw even, let's say, Norges Bank, the large sovereign wealth fund. They are actually buying equity. They own, I think, MicroStrategy. They own MetaPlanet and many others. And so people are trying to get this Bitcoin exposure in a variety of different ways. On top of that, we recently saw that the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund, they actually have bought about $500 million, just slightly less, of the Bitcoin ETFs. So what this begs is some of them are going to go and they're going to buy Bitcoin, spot market, take custody of the Bitcoin. El Salvador's taking custody of their Bitcoin. Other countries are going and they're going to mine, named a couple of those. But then some countries are going to say, I just want price exposure. You know, I've got sovereign wealth fund or I've got some sort of balance sheet. I want to be able to invest capital, have exposure to Bitcoin. And I don't care so much about the sovereignty of holding the asset. I just care about the individual ownership of the kind of price action. So ETFs provide a great solution there. Now, interestingly enough, it's not just nation states. We also saw at the state level, the Wisconsin Investment Board, they came out recently and they actually upped their ownership or shares in the ETF. They're doubling down, right? Their conviction, they're continuing to pour more money into this, and they're close to about 1% allocation to the Bitcoin ETF, which is pretty impressive. Now, if you go and you take a look, I also saw recently that somebody on Twitter came out and they said that they are actually going to take their Bitcoin, or they already had taken their Bitcoin, they converted it to ETFs. I found this fascinating. Should you hold Bitcoin or should you buy the ETF? Should you actually take self-custody or should you get price exposure? And the truth is that each solution is potentially valuable for different people. We just talked about countries that are buying the ETFs because they just want the price exposure. Well, there's a lot of people who say, you know what, I want to buy Bitcoin, but I don't want to leave it on an exchange. I've been convinced that that's actually a bad thing. But also, I don't have a lot of confidence that the Bitcoin that is actually being held in self-custody, that one, I know what I'm doing, or two, that I'm going to be able to secure it better than, let's say, a third-party custodian. And so naturally, you're going to start to see some people say, you know what, rather than hold Bitcoin, I'm going to hold the ETF. I can hold it in my brokerage account. It's secure. I don't have to worry about somebody stealing it from me, etc. And so these are the things that happen when an asset gets financialized. It used to be Bitcoin was one thing. You could buy spot Bitcoin, hold it long only. There was no way to short it. There was no way to do anything. Obviously that evolved. Eventually there was shorting. Then there was kind of other exchanges that got created, and there was derivatives that were introduced. Now there's these ETF wrappers. There's companies that hold Bitcoin. All this stuff continues to kind of evolve. And the way that I look at this is individuals should be able to do whatever they want with their money. There are pros and cons. There's trade-offs to every decision, but people's situations are different as well. And so some are going to need the sovereignty of Bitcoin. If you're somewhere in the world where you're worried about people seizing your bank account or censoring your payments, then holding Bitcoin is a great idea. If you're somewhere in the world and you're worried about there being a debt default or some sort of bubble popping, or your government kind of losing the confidence and trust as an institution, holding Bitcoin in self-custody would be pretty important. But there's a lot of people who say, I'm not worried about those things. I actually just want price exposure to this asset. And they're going to go and they're going to buy the ETF. Rather than judge people, I think it's really hard to make a kind of pass or an analysis on what other people do because you don't know their situation. You don't know what the risk profile is. You don't know if maybe there's security concerns. You don't know if maybe there's actually a need for self-custody. All those things really play into this decision.